Chapter 31. The symbol of the salt. Ye are the salt of the earth, but if the salt have lost its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is thenceforth good for nothing, but to be cast out, and to be trodden under foot of men. Matthew 5:13. Salt plays a most important role in all life, both in man and in nature. It has also played its part in the advance of civilization. The first great highways known to history were caravan routes formed by transporting salt from the deserts to point of civilization. Salt thus became the great reason for communication between different people, and hence the means by which civilization spread. The use of salt marks an advance in civilization from a wandering nomadic life, in which the people subsist chiefly upon animal food containing a large proportion of salt, to an agricultural life in which vegetables requiring salt for flavoring form a large proportion of the diet. Salt in the diet is necessary for the health of all herbivorous animals. It is necessary constituents of all animal tissue and of the blood. Experiments have repeatedly proven that the heart will not beat unless there is dissolved in the blood a certain percentage of common salt. Its use in everyday life is as a purifier and preservative. This means its chief function in the world. Like the heart of man, the heart of nature will not beat, nor will life continue without a proper proportion of salt, for salt preserves the force which makes life possible. Salt was one of the ingredients in the great work of the old alchemists who reduced all elements to their mystic sulfur, mercury, and salt, salt symbolizing that which purifies and preserves the life principle. Salt is found in oceans, deserts, salt lakes, and mines, the latter being deposits left by the evaporation of ancient seas. But wherever salt is found, the significance of its presence is due to its purifying and preserving qualities. The earth is a living entity, and when a portion of its surface becomes diseased beyond repair, when weighted down with the wickedness, crime, and sin of the people inhabiting it, that portion gives way under the load and through great cataclysm sinks down to be covered by the salt brine of the sea, where the putrefaction of the mass is completed. Putrefaction is a form of digestion or disintegration which breaks up old forms or bodies and liberates their life essence. These essence beings, sublimed by the heat of the putrefaction, rise up, and certain of them combine with the various salts in solution and are thus preserved. Others, in passing up through the brine, are purified ere they pass into the regions above. As these purified essences rise from the sea, certain of them are swept inward over the land, where they are assimilated by both vegetable and animal life, including man. In this way, all the advances in intelligence, as well as all the advances in art, science, and invention, brought forth for the benefit of mankind, the so-called lost arts, are still preserved in the thought aura of the locality. When subsequent races reach a corresponding stage of mental development, they are able to respond to the purified thought forms of the former civilizations and reproduce them as apparently new ideas or inventions. It is often noted that new ideas, new thoughts, and tendencies seem to sweep over communities in waves. They are indeed waves in the mental and even physical atmosphere, sweeping in from the sea, invigorating, stimulating, and advancing all forms of life. All essences not absorbed by vegetable and animal life or utilized by man pass into the aura of the earth as a permanent acquisition or seed for the use of future races. The modern airplane is but an imperfect expression of the thought forms left in the aura of the earth by the ancient Atlanteans, who had developed aeronautics to a far higher degree than has yet been attained in this age. There is no so-called lost art, but will in due time be recovered or discovered in the same way, for every thought and act of man is imprinted upon the Akashic records, and tends to reproduce itself through the brain of the reincarnated soul who has first produced it, and when so reproduced, it tends to be further perfected or redeemed, for such is the law of eternal progress. After the rise of the submerged land from beneath the brine of the sea, the waters drain off or evaporate, and the purifying process is continued in the resulting deserts. Following cyclic law, when disintegration of old forms is completed, and the combination of the lower essence with the salts of the sea is accomplished, the land, thus freed from its magnetic burdens of impurity, slowly rises above the surface, the waters evaporating, leaving behind their accumulated salt to the further action of the sun and the air. Thus are formed the vast tracts of land we call deserts. As in the body an excess of salt is injurious, so in the desert, where for ages no vegetables or animal life can exist. Yet in the fullness of time the salt is gradually disintegrated, sublimed or carried away by the action of the elements, and the land again becomes habitable. The Great Salt Lake in Utah, the deserts of the Sahara, and the Great Plains of western United States are examples of different steps in the process. Thus, little by little is the prophecy fulfilled. The desert shall bloom as the rose. Man passes through the same stages of purification by salt as does the earth. His youth is fresh and pure, is filled with high ideals, beautiful thoughts, and vast energy. Gradually, as he reaches his maturity, his pure ideals become overlaid with selfishness, dissimulation, greed, and impurity, and his life becomes weighted down with the weaknesses, material desires, and impurities of the world. Then come the purifying cataclysms of sorrow and suffering, in which all his boasted attainments dissolve from under him, and he sinks down under the brine poured out by the salt tears that flow from his eyes. Here as in the ocean, the salt purifies the nature and preserves the essence of good in the experiences he passes through, building it into his aura for future use. The lessons of sorrow must be well learned, or they will be repeated again and again until learned. After a period of desolation, when all comfort fails, comparable to a lonely desert, the paralyzing effects of sorrow gradually lessen and pass away. Then the rose that is born of suffering and watered with tears puts forth its bud and begins to open its petal in the purified and freshened soil of his heart. Analyzed from the higher standpoint, a drop of seawater contains every constituent necessary to life, and the same constituents are found in the salt, waters of life or tears. The well-known aphorism in Light on the Path is based upon the purifying action of salt. Before the eyes can see, they must be incapable of tears. Does not mean that you must be cold or lacking in understanding, in appreciation of the trials your brothers or sister are undergoing, or that you must be lacking in sympathy. For Jesus, the type of perfected man, wept in sympathy with the sisters at Lazarus' tomb, although possessing in his fullness the power to bring Lazarus back with a word. But it does mean that there will come a period in your life when your passions, emotions, and thoughts will be so mastered and purified by the action of the salt tears, which in your present stage of development are necessary, that there'll be no further need of tears, for the salt has done its work. As in the desert, where only after the salt has been absorbed can the roses bloom, so only after the purifying and cleansing has been accomplished, in your life can the rose bloom in your heart and your eyes truly see. Many ceremonies are connected with the partaking of salt. In the Middle Ages, the dish of salt was placed in the center of the long banquet board, and those who sat between the salt and the host were said to sit above the salt. Only members of the family were permitted this honor. Hence, when a guest was seated above the salt, he was accepted as a member of the family for the time being, and accorded all the privileges and honors due a son of the house. Those who sat below the salt were the squires, retainers, and followers of the lord of the house, and could rise above the salt only by valiant deeds. Among the Arabs to this day, salt is held sacred. One with whom they have partaken of salt becomes their friend, and if by chance they partake of salt with an enemy, that enmity must be forsworn. This ceremony is called the Covenant of Salt, and has been another remnant of the ancient ceremony which symbolized the covenant between man and his higher self. Traces of the symbolic meaning are found in many religions, the Roman Catholics still using salt in the baptismal service. These customs are remnants of the beautiful symbology taught the early races by the elder brothers of humanity, in which the symbolic purifying by the salt admitted the neophyte to spiritual sonship. The self-conquering, purifying, and cleansing which lifted the neophyte above the salt made it possible for him to enter the higher realms and become one with his Father in heaven. The first conscious step of the neophyte is a strong desire to purify his body, mind, and life, and preserve the divine attributes within his soul. This step is symbolized by the effect of the salt. Each of you who is ready to make the covenant of salt with your higher self agrees to let your life be purified of all its faults, both great and small, through the action of salt tears, even though sorrow and suffering are necessary to accomplish the result. When you have been thoroughly salted and cleansed from earthly impurities, then will you become clear crystal brains wherewith to salt the earth. Then indeed will the eyes be incapable of tears and be able to see the things of the Spirit. However, this does not mean that you are to encourage mere emotionalism or to look on the sorrowful side of life. For just as in the desert, an excess of salt kills out vegetation, so giving away to excessive weeping or emotion will make a desert of your heart and life, and you will remain in that state until you have conquered. You will never gain the victory until, as in the desert, the salt has been absorbed, the soil of your heart enriched by experience, and your life has brought forth its roses. Jesus said to his initiated disciples, "Ye are the salt of the earth. Have salt in yourselves and have peace one with another." As you start out to be the salt of the earth, be not dismayed that you are such a teeny grain compared to the great world around you. Determine not to lose your savor. The little grain of salt stops not to consider if it can accomplish its mission. It simply gives forth its innate qualities in perfect confidence. For if it has not lost its savor, everything it contacts must be salted. And the more it gives, the more it has to give, for its crystals grow and reproduce according to their saltiness. Let the light of your purified life so shine before men that they shall recognize in you the element of purification. Earnestly determine that the salt shall not lose its savor, but that you will do your duty as a grain of salt to wipe out and purify the world's misconception. In your daily life, like grains of salt, radiate the spiritual force which you draw from the Christ and transmute the putrefying conditions in the thought of humanity into love and purity.